Welcome, everyone, to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zervis, the Director of BIM Development, and today we're going to be talking a lot about the Hive family standards and all about what's new with that particular brand new feature. So I want to get into a little bit of a quick introduction. Now, also, just before I jump into this, as always, these webinars are, of course, recorded. Also, as always, if you're here participating with us live in the webinar, we always encourage you to leverage that questions window. Leverage that and ask us questions about today's topic, because we like to answer those in line when we can. So we've been working really hard here at CTC to kind of advance a lot of the new features of Hive. And it really has become a very important tool set for a lot of our customers, for almost all of our customers actually. It's a comprehensive platform that does a lot of stuff. In this session specifically, I want to highlight for you a new portion that's called Family Standards. I mean, picture this. You've got 1,000 families or more, probably thousands of families in your Revit family libraries. And if you put that content into Hive, you're probably fairly certain that it's in line with most of your standards, but do you know for sure if it's actually in line with your standards? And do you know the real quality of all of that content? That's the tricky part, right? Knowing for sure that something is actually of quality. The Hive Family Standards really is a lot like a virtual assistant, just kind of sitting right next to you. You get to tell it, hey, go check these families for me. Here's the rules, go check it out, and give me a report back on everything that you find, and it'll do that. And then the great part about this is that it really helps you kind of, instead of manually going through and checking the health of your libraries, it's going to give you those reports and you can stay up to date on those. And as you're reprocessing content in, you can simply rerun checks if you need to. So the goal here is that you're able to find all this information out with very little effort. So today, we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the new features. We're going to talk a bit about the relevance of why maybe you care about these new features. I'm going to show you a bit about them. And then we're also going to talk about how you can really begin to use it. In fact, we're going to be talking about how you can use it throughout the entire presentation. And since I'm not big on death by PowerPoint, I'm pretty much going to be jumping in live. And since nothing here today is really done inside of Revit at this point, I won't be using Revit at all. We're going to be talking a lot about the Hive portal, because at this point, you've probably already processed a lot of your family content directly into Hive. And so we're going to be piggybacking on that content you've already placed in there. So first, I want to start by talking about the admin controls that you have access to if you're a Hive CMS admin or organization admin. These controls are important. There's a brand new portal tab that's showing up in the online portal that you're going to need to be able to access. I want to take you through what the overall settings are in those tabs. I'm going to show you how you can invoke a standards check on libraries in your Hive CMS environment. And then I'm going to take a look at some of the results from some checks I've recently run. We're going to take a look at how all of that kind of ties together. So first off, let's take a look at this brand new portal tab that maybe you didn't notice was there yet. I'm going to jump over to our ctcsoftware.com website. When you sign in the first time here, I'm in my little sort of fake side company called CTC Express Tools. Obviously, our real company name is CTC Software. So I use this to demonstrate how it's going to look for you as Hive admins in this environment. So when I'm signed in here, I have kind of God level rights, and it drops you here on the dashboard page with the welcome to whomever you're signed in as. If you look here across the little main navigation ribbon, there's a new button here. It's called Standards. This is where all this standards kind of content exists. Now, in last week's webinar, I think it was last week or the week before, one of the two, in a recent webinar, I went over the project standards, new standards controls inside of here. And this time around, I want to take a look at the family side, the common standards and the family rule sets that exist inside of here. So with the family rule set, this is another brand new area. When you have Revit families within the Hive CMS environment, you will be able to go through and decide what of the standards checks and standards properties it is you care about. Now, if you want to know more about the actual rules for this, you can go to the help documentation for Hive, and that will help you understand a bit more. In fact, the help documentation is available right here, and it'll document out like what these standards actually mean and what it's actually checking. I'll give you a quick rundown. Like if I'm including shared parameter use in my automated rating checks, what that basically means is it checks against my corporate shared parameter file, and when it's looking at the families, if there's shared parameters in use, it checks to see if they're my shared parameters or if they're like orphaned or foreign GUIDs on those shared parameters. And then if it is foreign, it'll kind of deduct it a little bit from the score. So the goal here, of course, is to have all of my shared parameters in my families. There's also custom parameters in use, and it checks with the custom parameters to see if a family parameter that's a custom parameter is exactly the same name as something that's in my shared parameter file, meaning it probably should be a shared parameter, and that kind of deducts from the scores there. So if it looks like it's a shared parameter and I'm expecting it to show up in a schedule, of course, I would want it to be a shared parameter. So this check just kind of verifies that. It also checks the parameter names themselves. You may have standards, and maybe you've got old shared parameters or old family parameters, and they've got really poor naming conventions. You can go through and check for that, especially for things like mathematical characters. You can decide if it's using appropriate or inappropriate naming parts, and we'll take a look at what that means in a minute. Are they grouped correctly? I like having my length type dimensions put in specific groups. I don't like it showing up in text, for example. So you can decide what parameter groups are appropriate for different parameter types. You can set a maximum file size that you consider acceptable. It'll check that in your content as well. It understands about subcategory standards. So it looks at the subcategories in the family. It sees if they are used or not. So if there's custom built-in subcategories that are not used, that deducts from the score. If there's subcategories in the family that don't conform with your subcategory standards, that'll deduct from the score, especially if they're in use. I'm a big proponent of naming all of my reference planes. It's like identifying for myself, giving myself notes as to what means what. Some of you don't really care about that. So you might like maybe turn off the reference plane naming standards, and that would then not count towards the total score of the families after the family is checked. You also have some features here. These are sort of in kind of public beta right now. We're testing these out to see what you all think about this. And this is sort of search result culling. This means that within the Hive CMS, when a user is running a search, if the public rating, that is the Hive automated rating that we're talking about today, is lower than a certain score, it will remove those families from your search results, from their search results dynamically until that family is raised up to a higher level, meaning you can automatically make sure that really poor quality content just doesn't show up for your end users. So you can turn that off or on. And if it's on, when people open up Hive, if they're on the proper version of the Hive CMS, then it will start to cull those results after you've run standards checks. And then similarly down here, if you're dealing with your own sort of organization ratings, there's actually two different ratings here, the general or public rating and the organization specific rating. There's sort of two halves of the scores, and I'll show you a bit about what that means in a minute here. But with those, you can also cull if your organization values are less than a certain score, meaning it's like really poorly complying with your shared parameters, for example, and a few other items, then it will cull those families out of the results. Again, they're optional settings here. So of course, if you make any changes, you can save those and then move on. Now, I was up here talking a lot about shared parameters and a bit about parameter groupings and some subcategories. There's some common standards over here that these family checks are going to piggyback on. Now, the first thing you need to make sure you do if you want to check against your shared parameter file, of course, is upload a shared parameter file for your org. A feature that's coming out really, really soon is going to be allowing you to actually make edits to your shared parameter file. And then after you do so, you can immediately check that against your content if you want to. But for right now, you make your edits to your shared parameter file locally, and then you can publish that into the standards environment here. And when your families are checked, they are checking against the shared parameter file that you have specified here. You also have the ability for when you're checking within the families, checking the groupings here. And so I haven't actually gone through and done any real groupings. So a lot of my stuff's going to fail this particular check. But if I wanted, say, my common length parameter over here, to specifically and maybe only ever be placed into the dimensions group, I could add it to that particular group. I could add it to multiple groups if I want to. I could add it perhaps to mechanical if I was to go find that group down here. Maybe mechanical, this mechanical group here. So if I grab length again and say add that to mechanical, I could add that, save my settings, and when I run my checks, it's going to say, oh, if length is in either of those two groups, that's great. And if it's not, well, it's going to fail that check because maybe somebody put it into lining or they put it into life safety, and maybe I don't want the length parameters in those groups. So it's going to help me sort of make sure that the groupings of my data types are what my users might expect. If you have nothing in there at all, it's just all of that particular value is going to be meaningless for you because it's not really able to check anything, and so everything's going to fail because no parameters are allowed in any groups. That was just kind of silly. So you're going to want to make sure you go through and tune that a little bit for yourselves. Also, for your parameter naming rules, there are certain things that I really do not like appearing in my shared parameter names. I don't like things like curly braces. I don't like greater than less than signs. I don't like abbreviations personally, slashes, caret signs. These are things that I just don't want to appear in my shared parameter or family parameter names. Apostrophes and quotation marks, those are all what I would consider not great. But there's a certain number of name parts that are okay. Like I often use CTRL or CTRL underscore or just the underscore key in general. I use hyphens periodically, even though it's a mathematical character. Sometimes I'll see things like open and close parentheses on parts of names of parameters. And so I add that to my acceptable name rule. And if any parameters are seen with that, their name, either shared or custom, is considered fine. But anything with these, if it's got these naming things, it'll detract from the overall score of that part of the family check. Now, I haven't published any custom subcategories yet. If I did want to, what I would do is open up a nice master project file that was really good and clean, maybe my warehouse file or my container file that holds all of my standards, including my subcategories. And from that, there's a new button that shows up on the ribbon that lets you publish your standards. Now, I haven't done that yet with this, so I don't have any custom subcategories to check, so none of my families are going to be failing any subcategory checks because nothing is considered bad at this point. But if I had to find subcategories over here, it would say, okay, when checking a family, if they have these for a particular category and subcategory, that's okay. But I haven't published mine yet, so I'm not going to be demonstrating that particular part today. Once again, if you were to save your settings, then of course it's going to lock these values in, and once this is ready to rock, you can actually initiate a family check. So I actually kind of stepped one step ahead here and covered all of the overall settings before I moved forward in my PowerPoint presentation, but I do want to talk about just a couple of these here. There are very specific family rule sets. We just kind of showed a few of these off. There's those general settings, and there are the search result calling options that are there in beta that I mentioned. The ability to say if it falls below a certain level, don't show it to my end users. There's also a bunch of those common standards. We just whipped through those, the shared parameters, the parameter groupings, the naming rules, and the custom subcategories. And so these are all overall settings that you can configure and define what that means for you at your company, and what you decide is meaningful for the quality of your family content. So now that we've gone through that, we've actually already taken a look at all of those settings. Let's take a look at what initiating a standards check kind of looks like. So when you're running a library standards check, you basically select your libraries. It's really simple here. You select your libraries that you want to check. This is done from the CMS tab in Hive, and then you initiate the check. And what will happen is once you tell it to go, you're going to get an email that says, hey, this check has begun. And it will then also send you an email when it's all complete telling you, this check is complete, and you can download your results as an Excel file if you want to. And so when you download that as an Excel file, you can review that however you want. It'll give you scores of 1 to 5, like 1 star to 5 star, category by category, for the things that you've marked that you care about. So to initiate this, let's take a look at what this actually means in the portal itself. So over here in the portal, if I go to the CMS tab, now that I've saved all of my settings that I want to be using, On the CMS tab over here for your libraries, you've always had these little checkboxes over here. And so if I wanted to initiate a standards check on, say, my corporate library for Revit content and maybe my MEP Productivity Pack library, and I want to see how conformant to my standards it is, I can check as many or as few of these as I want. And then up here, there's a little button that's the check. This is the standards check. When you click that, it'll just fire off that task. And in the background, what it's going to do, it's going to use our system. It's going to use the behind the scenes headless system to open up, scan, check, and verify every single one of your families that are in those libraries in particular. And it's going to then send back a score for all of the individual files that are associated to the content that's in there. So it's actually a really simple initiation. Now, for those of you who have ever used from the BIM Manager Suite, the Family Standards Checker, it's basically the exact same tool, but you don't have to let it run on your computer and use your Revit license. It's using the back-end system, the Hive system, to automate that standards check and to record and publish those standards into the Hive database so that any families that match certain criteria or maybe don't match certain criteria, again, you can cull out of your actual results that people can search and find. So let's take a look at reviewing some of those results. When you're reviewing the results, there's a couple of things you can do. That email that you're going to get, the content review results email, what you're going to do is basically click on that. You're going to download the Excel file that results from this actual check. And then what I like to do is leverage Microsoft Power BI personally. I use that because it makes my life a lot easier for actual viewing this huge spreadsheet worth of data. If you want an example Power BI file, I encourage you to reach out to us. We're more than happy to send you the default one that we use when we're leveraging this. Another way that you can get this, instead of using that results email and waiting to download an Excel file that you then have to load into a Power BI environment, you could leverage the Web API. We've talked a lot in the past about our Web API, our reporting API. That is available to everybody. It's included in Hive. It's free. You just have to reach out and get for yourselves a reporting API key so that it knows how to pull your corporate data from the system in a safe and secure way. So if you want to be able to leverage that, you can. I want to show you a little bit about how you could leverage this within the Microsoft Power BI environment. And in my case today, I'm leveraging the Web API. However, you could absolutely just use the Excel file download for this. It's basically the same exact data. I'm just leveraging this from a Web API environment because it makes it easier for me to get all of my results from all of my standards checks ever, not just the check that I told it to run today. So let's take a quick look at what I have in my environment here. I am in a Microsoft Power BI file. You can absolutely reach out to us and pick this up for yourselves as well. You'll notice that in my content management collection here, there's a lot of tabs here on this major sort of table of contents. And if I wanted to get access to just my family standards user review, this is actually user reviews sitting out here, I can see the average user ratings on my content and how they've rated it. So in Hive, you have the ability to rate things 1 to 5 stars. And if it's not rated, it just gets nothing. It's just empty in there. But in my case, since I've only got 7 total families rated that somebody has gone through explicitly and put some kind of rating on, down here I'm seeing the bottom 10 families, well, bottom 7 families in my case. So it's showing me the results of what the ratings are here. I've got a few 5-star families. That's actually not the bottom. Well, I mean, I guess it is the bottom because there's only 7 rated. And there's a couple of 1-star and a 2-star and a 3-star family inside of here. So 7 of my families are rated, and 7,347 of my families have never been rated by an end user in my company. Got about 7,300 families individually, or files, I should say, pieces of content that exist in Hive. But now, this is the subjective user rating. What I wanted to know was my Hive rating here. So Hive has gone through when I check my libraries, and it's going to do sort of the same thing. It now tells me that 504 of my individual distinct family files have been checked. This is specifically isolating Revit content here. There's 2,600 of my families that have been unrated. They've never gone through the automatic rating cycle. The average health of the content that is rated is 2.64 stars. I can see sort of the breakdown here of how many of my files are rated by whatever kind of general star rating. So 2.5 stars seems to be about pretty much the average. 50 of my families are in that range. Some of it's below it, some of it's above it. Obviously, a lot of my content isn't following my own standards because a lot of my content, I change my standards periodically and I haven't gone back and updated all my families. So my stuff is showing really low. The expectation is your family content should show pretty high. I can also see here the lowest overall rated content, the average rating overall. I have a lot of sub 2 rated content. So 0.95, 0.90, just 0.8 here. There's a lot of content that's in this mix that's pretty trash, and I probably should go through an exercise of fixing that. The average low rating is 1.92 in this case for all that content. So of the lowest 10, that's pretty poor scores. If I want to start reviewing this a bit more, I have 2 tabs set up over here for the things that I care about in my general reports and in my overall organization level reports, where I can see how this stuff is scoring. So I have this organized by the lowest general score. I could also choose to rate this by the lowest overall rating, descending, so I can see all those files that were the lowest 10 and kind of how they rate in the general scores. And I can start to see here the identity data values. So they have 0 identity data in the vast majority of these families, meaning no manufacturer information or model numbers, none of that stuff. And if I care about that, that's meaningful. The detail level control of these is fairly low, though not completely poor. Detail level basically means as I change coarse, medium, fine detail level, what does that mean for my families? Is it actually updating for the coarse, medium, fine? Detail level in 3D specifically looks at that detail level in the 3D space. It checks to see if I have 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional or CAD graphics in the plan visibility. General overall visibility, is there some views in which this content is just completely invisible? Is it using imported content or no? And what I'm looking for here is 5s. I want 5s, I don't want 1s. 5s means that it's scoring perfect. So the nice thing here is that none of this content that I'm looking at here is bad because of imported content. That's something that always makes me nervous, is seeing a bunch of trash imported content inside of there. Visibility is kind of an important thing. I like making sure things are visible in all the views where I expect them. The plan visibility is kind of important here. I do expect things to show up correctly in plan views, and there's some plan views like perhaps ceiling plans where certain things are representing as not able to show, like door handles, which is probably appropriate. But at least I'm aware that, yeah, it's probably not showing in some of those views, or maybe floor plans at all. It's not showing probably in plans at all. I don't ever show door handles in plan views personally. So that's probably why it's scoring a 1 right here. And I can keep going over here to the right. There's a ton of values that are in this list. Does it have MEP connectors? And if it does, so these ones don't have any MEP connectors, but if they do have MEP connectors, should the family have it in the first place? And if it should, does it? Meaning, is it an MEP category? And if it's an MEP category, does it have a connector? Does it have a description telling you what the connector is used for? Most of the out-of-the-box Autodesk families don't have any descriptions, and so it's pretty garbage and difficult to use. Are the properties of my connectors mapped correctly? Are they facing the correct direction, meaning they're facing away from the solid geometry and not pointing into the family? You see a lot of manufacturer content when you download it. Those connectors are facing the wrong way, and it's basically unusable. Are they linked to each other where appropriate, especially in specific kinds of families like fittings families? It's important that they're linked correctly. So there's a lot of data that's inside of here. Does the geometry flex? Do the types flex without error? There's a lot of stuff going on here where there's a lot of errors in my families. Do they use type catalogs or not? Right? Do they have assembly codes or omni-class numbers? There's a lot of properties that are listed here in the general report that's just giving you an over idea of how the families themselves are functioning, if they're functioning. There's also the organizational level report. And for the things that I care about in the organizational level, I've actually got them listed out here. Is it leveraging my master shared parameter file correctly? Does it have custom parameters that look like they should be shared parameters? A lot of my families are scoring out as 1s here. This is actually pretty bad. All the parameters in the family that are shared parameters, they're not pointing at all to my shared parameter file. And a lot of those parameters that are in this family, whatever this family is looks like it should be in my shared parameter file, or it is, but it's just not mapped correctly. They're not grouped right. Remember, I told you all these were going to fail because I didn't set up my grouping yet. All of these are failing my file size check. They're all bigger than the file size that I specified as being okay. When this check was run, my file size was set to 0.5 meg, and all of the families that are in this list are obviously larger than that because they're all failing the file size check. They don't have any subcategories specified in them that are being used correctly, so they're all failing because I haven't, again, specified that. Parameter naming is pretty trash in here. They're using a lot of mathematical characters in their parameter names. They don't have good previews. There's a lot of things that are set up on here that I really don't like. The reference planes are not named. For me, that's an important thing. So a lot of these reference planes are not named. Some of the families are doing okay, right down here. This one has a good preview and it has all of its reference planes named, and so it's scoring out all right there. Some of these are pretty good where most of the reference planes are named. Maybe there's a couple that are not. But yeah, you can use this to understand how the families are working for you. For me, the biggest things that I always check and why I put it up front was the master shared parameter, the custom parameter, and when I get my file or my parameter grouping all sorted, I'm going to have those three be sort of my primary key things. And you can actually modify this overall rating. This is just a calculated value inside of Power BI, and you could tell it to just use the average of these properties instead of using everything that's inside of here. Because maybe you don't care about everything, you care about just a couple key things. You can customize this. That's the nice thing about these downloadable reports and the ability to leverage tools like Power BI is you can actually use the properties and values that you think are meaningful, that you care about, and use that in your overall score. But all I have to do here is hit refresh and give it a couple of minutes, and it's going to refresh and pull all of the data, and I'll know the general overall health of my entire library right here and know which families probably need the most of my attention to go fix. And as I fix them and reprocess them and let them be rechecked, when they get rechecked, they're going to start falling off this list and something else will replace it until I get all of my content to a really high quality, because I have very specific actions that I can take now that I know where to focus my energies. That's the biggest takeaway today, is that with very little effort, you're processing your content into Hive anyway. And as long as you define what your standards are that you really want, well, that's the big deal. So you can begin reviewing these results and really take actionable steps, or assign team members on your team to go take actionable steps and see, as they reprocess the content in and you recheck it, you can find out, well, did that make a change? Did that help my scores? Did that make my content work better than it did before? So this can be a really, really great way for you to check all that standards with no effort on your own system, other than just checking a box and saying to check the library. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for those of you who aren't going to hang out for the QA session. Thank you for participating with us live. We always appreciate that. We hope it keeps it more interesting for you, and certainly it keeps it more interesting for us when you have the ability to interject questions in here. For those of you watching this as a recording in the future, we hope that if you do have questions, you'll reach out to us here at CTC. You can get our contact information from the channel on which you're watching this.